Chapter 15: The Evolution of Intelligence. 1. General Principles of the Evolution of Intelligence. 2. Mammals. 3. Birds. 4. Primates. 5. Hominids. 6. IQs of monkeys, apes, and pre-human hominids. Turn now to the question of how intelligence has evolved. Throughout the course of evolution, there has been a general trend for species to develop greater intelligence. This chapter gives an account of the principles responsible for this. The evolution of race differences in intelligence has been a continuation of this trend and is discussed in the next two chapters. 1. General Principles of the Evolution of Intelligence. The general principles of the evolution of greater intelligence over the course of some 225 million years have been formulated by Jarrison. He has shown that two principles have operated. The first is that from time to time, species have occupied new environments or niches that have required increased cognitive demands. When this has occurred, these species have responded by evolving larger brains with which to accommodate greater intelligence. These have enabled the species to deal with the cognitive demands of the new niche. The second principle is that carnivores and herbivores have been engaged in a form of arms race in which carnivores have needed to become more intelligent in order to catch herbivores, while herbivores have needed to become more intelligent in order to escape predators. A useful account of this process has been given by Dawkins and Krebs. There is a problem in making comparisons between species in brain size and intelligence, because there is a strong association across species between brain size and body size. The reason for this is that much of the brain services the functions of the body, so species with large bodies have large brains. To control for body size and comparing the brain size of different species, Jarrison has devised the concept of the encephalization quotient as a measure of brain size in relation to body size. He sets the EQ of average living mammals at 1 and expresses the EQS of other extinct and living species in relation to this standard. Jarrison defines intelligence of species as their EQ, which determines the information processing capacity of the brain. The important developments in the evolution of higher EQS as new species have evolved are summarized in Table 15.1. These data have been compiled from Jarrison, Cutler, and Harvey and Clutton-Brock. Rows 1, 2, and 3 of the table show that 225 million years ago fish and reptiles had small EQs of 0.05, and that their EQs have shown no increase by 60 million years ago or at the present day. Table 15.1. Evolution of encephalization quotients. 2. Mammals. Row 4 shows that the EQ of the first mammals that evolved approximately 225 million years ago was 0.25. This was a 5-fold increase from the reptiles from which they evolved, and was the first quantum leap in the increase of EQ and intelligence. The explanation of this development is that the reptiles were largely diurnal and relied primarily on vision for information about the world. Like living reptiles, their behavior consisted largely of hardwired responses to visual sign stimuli. The first mammals were small animals about the size of the rat and occupied a nocturnal niche in which they slept during the day and foraged at night. This niche was advantageous because it afforded protection from predator reptiles, but it had the disadvantage that for nocturnal animals, vision is seriously inadequate for gathering information about the external world, although it has some value at dusk and dawn and on moonlit nights. To overcome this problem, the early nocturnal mammals developed their senses of hearing, smell, and touch, and an integration processor to obtain and analyze information from the three senses as well as from vision. They were then able to integrate information obtained from the four senses to identify predators, food, and mates. The development of the information processing capacities of hearing, smell, and touch required the enlargement of the auditory, olfactory, and tactile centers of the brain, and the development of an integration capacity to combine the information obtained from the four senses. These new cognitive functions required a 5-fold increase of the encephalization quotient over that of average fish and reptiles, from 0.05 to 0.25. Row 5 shows that by 60 million years ago, the EQ of average mammals had increased to 0.75, representing a 3-fold increase from 0.25 in the first mammals. Row 6 shows that over the next 60 million years, the EQ of average mammals increased further to 1. Thus, during the 225 million years following their first appearance, the EQ of average mammals increased approximately fourfold. This increase appears to have taken place largely through the operation of the principle of the arms race between carnivores and herbivores, each of which exerted selection pressure on the other for greater intelligence and higher EQs to accommodate it. 3. Birds. Row 7 shows the appearance of the first birds approximately 150 million years ago. The first bird, Archaeopteryx, had an EQ of 0.10, twice as large as that of the reptiles from which it evolved. This was the second quantum leap in EQ and intelligence. Rows 8 and 9 show that the EQs of birds had increased to approximately 0.7% by 60 million years ago, and increased further to 1 over the next 60 million years up to the present. Thus, the average living birds have approximately the same EQ of 1 as that of average living mammals. The explanation for the increase in the EQs of birds appears to be that they occupied the niche of living largely in the air. This had the advantage of being well away from predators, but the disadvantage that newly hatched chicks in nests in the tops of trees had to be fed for several weeks until they had grown sufficiently to be able to fly and fend for themselves. To raise their chicks, the parents had to build nests, learn the location of their nests and spatial maps of their terrain, form pair bonds between mother and father birds, and cooperate in feeding their young and in defending their nests from predators. These tasks evidently required greater intelligence and learning capacities and a higher EQ than was needed by fish and reptiles, which do not care for their young. The greater intelligence of birds and mammals such as dogs and rabbits has been shown in various experimental tasks reviews by Razran. The increase in the EQs of birds over time probably occurred largely through the arms race between predators and non-predaceous birds, each of which exerted selection pressure on the other for greater intelligence and higher EQs to accommodate it. 4. Primates. Row 10 shows the EQ of 0.7% of the first primates who appeared approximately 60 million years ago, following the extinction of the dinosaurs. The EQ of the first primates was about the same as that of average mammals and birds at that time. Rows 11 through 15 give the EQs of the living representatives of the first primates: tree shrews 0.85, patos, gelagos, the gentle lemur, and the macaco lemur. These 5 living species have an average EQ of 1.1, an increase of about 50% over that of the first primates of 60 million years ago. Row 16 shows the EQ of one of the first monkeys, which appeared about 30 million years ago. Rows 17 through 22 show the EQs of 6 typical living species of monkey. Their EQs range between 1.3 for the Longur probidus and the 3.5 for the Capuchin apella, so all of them have higher EQs than the first monkeys of 30 million years ago, with their EQ of 1. Row 23 shows an EQ of 2 for the first species of apes that appeared around 16 million years ago. The principal distinctions between monkeys and apes is that apes have no tails and more flexible shoulders that allow them to raise their arms above their heads and swing from branches of trees, whereas monkeys walk on branches. Rows 24 through 28 give the EQs of the 5 species of living great apes. The EQs range from 2 for the gorillas of Central Africa through 2.1 for the Siamang gibbon of Southeast Asia and Indonesia, 2.4 for the orangutan of Borneo and Sumatra, 2.6 for the chimpanzee of Central Africa, to 2.8 for the lar gibbon of Southeast Asia and Indonesia. Considered as a genus, the great apes do not appear to have evolved higher EQs than the monkeys. The average EQ of the 5 species of great apes is 2.4, while the average of the 6 species of monkeys is 2.3. Some of these EQs are derived from quite small numbers and may not be strictly accurate because of sampling errors. The 30 million years of their existence was much greater than that of other mammals and of birds during the same period. This was the third great quantum leap in the evolution of brain size and intelligence. There appear to have been 2 reasons for this rapid increase in EQ. First, while the early primates were nocturnal like the mammals from which they evolved, the monkeys and apes became diurnal, living by day and sleeping at night. Diurnal species rely heavily on vision to obtain information about the external world, and in accordance with this principle, The visual centers in the brain increased in size in monkeys and apes to give greater visual processing capacity. Second, they lived in social groups, whereas the early primates were solitary. Living in groups has the advantages for securing the exclusive use of a territory and its resources, and cooperation in finding food, rearing the young, and defense against predators. The cost is that the individuals have to learn complex social skills for living harmoniously with other group members, with whom they have to cooperate for defense of the territory, but who are also competitors for food and mates. The social system of these animals typically consists of groups of around 30 to 80 animals, in which there are dominance hierarchies in which 2 or 3 dominant males have more food, sole access to the females when they are in estrus, and the best sleeping berths in trees. To keep their position, dominant males typically form alliances to fight off challenges from non-dominant males. The non-dominant males belong to the group, but have to be careful to respect the position of the dominant males, who will drive them out of the group if they are challenged. Nevertheless, the non-dominant males seem to understand that if they exercise adroit social skills, the time will come when the dominant males will grow old and weak and eventually die, and they will be able to succeed them. To maintain their position in the group while awaiting this eventuality, non-dominant males have to exercise restraint and judgment in biding their time, until they have a good chance of successfully challenging and displacing a dominant male. Meanwhile, they form alliances with other non-dominant males to maintain their position in the group and strengthen their chances of becoming dominants. The acquisition of these social skills requires rapid learning and the capacity to inhibit challenges to the dominant males. These social skills have come to be designated social intelligence, and they appear to need a relatively large EQ for understanding and manipulating the social relationships, observing, learning, and memorizing the characteristics of other group members, and inhibition of impulsive actions. Males with high social intelligence eventually become dominants and are able to reproduce, and this drives up the social intelligence of the species. The theory that becoming highly social animals was the niche that drove up the EQs of monkeys and apes has been developed by Dunbar, who has shown that among primates the size of the social group in primate species is correlated with the EQ, suggesting that primates that live in larger groups need a higher EQ to deal with the more complex social relationships present among their members. Thus, the monkeys and apes occupied a new niche as cooperative social species that required greater intelligence provided by higher EQs. Monkeys and apes display in various ways a high level of intelligence consistent with their high EQs. The most studied species is the chimpanzee. In the 1920s, it was shown by Kohler that when confronted with a difficult problem, such as how to retrieve a banana hanging from the ceiling and out of reach, chimpanzees can figure out how to use boxes to build a platform onto which they can climb and grab the banana. Later, it was shown by Goodall that chimpanzees in the wild learn to make and use tools for a variety of purposes. They take sticks from which they pare off the side stems, lick to make tacky, insert into the holes in termite mounds and ant nests, pull out the tacky sticks and eat the termites or ants adhering to them. They make pestles to pound the pulp from wood into an edible paste, and chisels to open bees' nests, use stones to break open nuts, use leaves for drinking cups and to clean themselves, and take up pieces of wood to threaten and hit predators and intruders into their territories. They also have a vocabulary of around a dozen cries to convey information, including the presence of predators, intrusion into their territories of neighboring groups, the location of a supply of food, willingness or unwillingness to share food, and so on. It has recently been shown that orangutans also make and use tools. In laboratory studies, only monkeys and apes can master oddity problems, in which 3 objects are presented, 2 of which are the same, and the correct choice is the odd one, and 1 trial learning sets, where 2 different objects are presented and the correct choice varies from day to day. 5. Hominids. The 4th quantum leap in EQ and intelligence took place with the evolution of the hominids. This is the series of species that led eventually to the appearance of Homo sapiens. It began about 4 million years ago in Central East Africa, in what is now Kenya and Tanzania, with the appearance of the Australopithecines, and was followed by the three successive species of Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and finally Homo sapiens. The times of these species and their EQs are given in rows 29 to 32 of Table 15.1. The first of these, the Australopithecines, comprised several species. The first to appear was Australopithecus afarensis, which evolved from an ape closely resembling the chimpanzee. Over the next 2 million years, further species of Australopithecines evolved, including Africanus, robustus, and boisei. The later species were larger and their brain sizes increased, but not in proportion to their body size, so their encephalization quotients remained the same. The reason for the evolution of the Australopithecines was that apes are adapted to live in forests, but in Central East Africa the climate became drier, and as a result much of the forest disappeared and was replaced by grasslands with some brushwood and the occasional clump of trees. Hence, the apes in Central East Asia had to adapt to survive in the new niche of open savanna. Their three most distinctive adaptations were that they stood upright. Whereas apes move by knuckle walking on all fours, their thumbs evolved in opposition to the fingers, and their EQs increased. The principal adaptive advantages of the upright posture were that it afforded them better vision, that enabled them to see predators at a greater distance, and to walk over long distances to forage for food, and that it freed the hands. The freeing of the hands and the development of the thumb in opposition to the fingers made it possible to use the hands to carry food from a distance back to the camp, to make stone tools, and to grip stones and pieces of wood more effectively, and use them to drive off predators. The EQs of the hominids showed approximately a threefold increase over the course of about 4 million years, from about 2.6% of the apes from whom they evolved to 7.5% of Homo sapiens. This was a very rapid rate of increase, as compared with the 56 or so million years for the same rate of increase to evolve in the primates from 0.7% of the first primates some 60 million years ago to 2.6% of the most encephalized monkeys and apes. The explanation for this increase is that the hominids entered a new niche of the open savanna, in which survival was more cognitively demanding than that of the apes from which they evolved. The cognitive demands of the new niche would have consisted principally of finding a variety of different kinds of foods and protecting themselves from predators. The Australopithecines and the succeeding hominids continued to live largely on plant foods, like the apes from whom they evolved, but in open savanna these had to be more varied and dispersed over a larger terrain than those of apes. To obtain these foods they would have needed spatial maps of a large area, and this would have required a larger brain. The foods they ate can be determined from the wear of their teeth, which shows that they subsisted largely on a diet of leaves and fruits, but that they also ate tubers, nuts, grass seeds, and insects. Some of them lived on the shores of Lakes Baringo and Turkana in present-day Kenya. Here they could pick up shellfish and crack them open by hitting them with a rock, which they were able to grip between their thumbs and fingers. The hominids supplemented their plant and insect diet with a certain amount of meat, obtained by scavenging, and possibly by occasionally killing small animals. Baboons and chimpanzees sometimes kill small animals for food, although meat has never become more than a small part of their diet. Possibly the Australopithecines and the later hominids Homo habilis did the same. They were also scavengers of the remains of animals killed by lions, cheetahs, and leopards. The sites of Homo habilis contain the bones of large herbivores with carnivore teeth marks on which stone-cut marks made by the hominids have been superimposed. This shows that the large herbivores had been killed by lions, cheetahs, and leopards, and that Homo habilis scavenged the bones, which they broke up to extract the marrow and brains, which the lions, cheetahs, and leopards were unable to get at. With their increased EQ of 4.3, Homo habilis became the first hominids with the brain power to make stone tools on an extensive scale by knapping flints to produce sharp cutting implements with which they made weapons such as spears and knives to dismember the carcasses of large mammals killed by lions, cheetahs, and leopards. In addition to obtaining food, the other principal problem of the hominids living in open grasslands would have been to protect themselves against lions, cheetahs, and leopards. Apes and monkeys escape from the big cats by climbing into trees and swinging or jumping from one tree to another. For the Australopithecines and the later hominids in open grasslands, this was no longer possible. They must have warded off lions, leopards, and cheetahs by throwing stones at them and hitting them with clubs made from pieces of wood collected from the few trees that remained. For this, their newly evolved thumbs, giving greater gripping power, would have been a great advantage. Chimpanzees sometimes use sticks to ward off predators, but they do not collect an arsenal of sticks and stones for this purpose. The Australopithecines would have had to do this, and this would have required greater foresight and intelligence. A further selection pressure, proposed by Alexander for the increase in the EQS of the hominids, was probably that more intelligent individuals were more effective as toolmakers and hunters, and had greater social intelligence that enabled them to secure higher rank in dominance hierarchies through which they increased their fertility. 6. IQs of monkeys, apes, and pre-human hominids. A number of attempts have been made to assess the intelligence of monkeys, apes, and pre-human hominids by using Piaget's theory of the development of intelligence in children. Piaget's theory states that children progress through 4 stages of cognitive development. The first of these is the sensory-motor stage of infancy, in which the child learns about the properties of objects, space, time, and causality. At about the age of 2, children make the transition to the pre-operational stage, in which they acquire language and abstract concepts but are not yet able to understand logical principles. This stage lasts until the age of about 6. In Western societies, children at around the age of 7 make the transition to the concrete operation stage when they can grasp logical principles but only in concrete terms. At around the age of 12 years, children progress to the 4th and final stage, formal operations, when they become able to think logically in terms of general principles divorced from concrete examples. The applications of this theory to the intelligence of monkeys, apes, and pre-human hominids have been summarized by Parker and McKinney. Their conclusion is that most species of monkeys do not progress beyond the first of Piaget's stages, so they remain at the cognitive level of human toddlers at the ages of about 2 years. On the scale of human intelligence, their IQ would be about 12. Apes are at Piaget's early pre-operation stage and reach the cognitive level of the average European 34-year-old. Their IQ would be about 22. Estimates of the Piagetian level of ability achieved by successive species of hominids from tools they made have been attempted by Wynne. His conclusion is that Homo habilis, living in East Africa around 2.4 million years ago, was making simple stone tools that required the early stage of pre-operational ability, about the same as that of apes. Homo erectus, who appeared about 1.7 million years ago with a somewhat larger brain, made the more sophisticated Acheulean stone tools, including bifaced hand axes that would have required the concrete operational thinking of the kind achieved by contemporary European 7 to 8-year-olds. From this, it can be inferred that their IQ would have been about 50.